Bonjour à toutes et à tous et bienvenue à cette 12e réunion internationale des anciens de l'Institut ici à Genève. Merci beaucoup d'être avec nous, que vous soyez en ligne, ici dans cette salle ou dans une salle de la Villa Barton. Mon nom est Karine Leu, je suis responsable des relations avec les anciens élèves de cette maison. Je vous rappelle le programme qui nous attend la prochaine heure. Donc, dans quelques secondes, notre directrice, Madame Marie-Laure Salle, vous dira quelques mots avant de passer la parole au professeur Achim Venman pour une table ronde 100% alumni sur la question « Humanitarianism in a Changing World ». Celle-ci sera suivie de la remise de 2 Alumni Awards, le premier à Patricia Dancy et le second à Monsieur Pierre Kruenbuhl, que nous vous présenterons plus tout à l'heure. À l'issue de ce moment, vous aurez l'occasion de découvrir les 14 nouveaux portraits qui sont dans le hall de la Villa Barton. Nous avons également la chance d'accueillir Monsieur Jean-Daniel Ruche qui est sur ces portraits. Et puis, pour les portraits que vous n'aurez pas encore vus et qui ont été créés l'année dernière, l'année d'avant et l'année encore d'avant, nous avons créé une petite brochure où vous retrouverez l'ensemble des portraits. Vous verrez qu'il y a par exemple M. Morgenthau, il y a par exemple M. Raphaël Grossi qui est le directeur général de l'Agence internationale atomique. Devant moi, je vois M. Jean-Pierre Gontard qui fait partie également de ces 100 portraits que l'on essaye de créer pour le 100e anniversaire. Je vois qu'il y a à côté M. Jacques Moreillon qui en fait également partie. Donc voilà, j'espère que ces portraits vont vous inspirer. Vous, les jeunes que je vois au fond qui êtes arrivés aujourd'hui, c'est presque votre premier jour, vous commencerez lundi, mais merci en tout cas de nous faire la joie d'être là aujourd'hui et j'espère que vous pourrez pleinement profiter des 2 heures que vous aurez tout à l'heure pour échanger avec ces personnes qui ont quelques années de plus que vous, un début de carrière et j'espère qu'ils vous inspirent surtout. Voilà, merci. Du coup, je passe la parole à notre directrice, Madame Marie-Laure Salle. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Karine, et bon après-midi, bonne journée à toutes et à tous. C'est vraiment un très grand plaisir chaque année pour moi de vous retrouver pendant cette journée des alumni. Grand bonjour à tous ceux qui sont en ligne aussi, soit à la Villa, soit ailleurs. Cette saison est une saison intense puisque, comme chaque année, l'Institut combine sa cérémonie de diplomation qui a eu lieu hier. Nous avons eu 440 étudiants diplômés, certains que je vois qui sont aujourd'hui nos plus jeunes alumni. Du coup, on peut les applaudir, je crois. Donc 440 diplômés avec dans cette salle, dans ces 2 salles, puisqu'on a fait ça en 2 fois, vraiment les termes qui décrivent l'ambiance, c'était très fort, très intense. C'était l'énergie, le courage, l'espoir, la joie aussi évidemment et l'engagement. Et pour ces cérémonies, on a eu la chance d'avoir déjà hier, Patricia Dancy et Pierre Kruenbuhl, et je veux aussi vraiment les remercier très sincèrement d'avoir été présents parce que les mots qu'ils ont donnés à notre communauté, à nos étudiants qui sont aujourd'hui des alumni, à nos collègues, à nos professeurs qui étaient aussi présents dans la salle, étaient des mots vraiment forts qui étaient à la hauteur du moment. On va dire ça comme ça, à hauteur des complexités du monde tel qu'il est aujourd'hui. Donc un très grand merci à vous deux et on aura le temps évidemment de revenir là-dessus. Nous avons hier aussi, pour la première fois, lancé un prix en l'honneur de notre collègue, le professeur Mahmoud Mohamedou. Je tenais à mentionner ça aujourd'hui parce que ça fait 1 an, quasiment jour pour jour aujourd'hui, qu'il est décédé. Il est parti bien trop tôt et donc nous avons inauguré cette année le prix War and Peace en son honneur que nous donnerons donc à l'Institut chaque année pour une thèse de master soit en MINT, soit en histoire et politique internationale. Lundi, Nous continuerons avec la rentrée. Et donc là, 460 nouveaux étudiants qui nous rejoignent. Certains, je suis sûre, sont ici. Je ne les connais pas encore, mais j'aurai un grand plaisir, évidemment, à les rencontrer à partir de lundi. Une rentrée qui va être intense. Il faut dire que cette année, nous avons eu plus de 30% de candidats en plus par rapport aux années, ces dernières années, avec une augmentation particulièrement importante des candidats américains, plus 80%, et une baisse de 30% des candidats chinois. Voilà. Donc pour l'instant, on analysera tout ça un peu plus à froid, mais voilà, c'est déjà, je pense, un élément important. La cohorte qui rentre, comme toutes les autres cohortes, est vraiment très internationale, avec à peu près le même, voilà, la même répartition. 14% d'étudiants suisses, nous cherchons à rester à peu près autour de ce chiffre-là. C'est un chiffre qui nous paraît être le bon. 6% d'étudiants africains, là, ça ne va pas, ce n'est pas assez. Nous souhaitons aller beaucoup plus loin dans cette direction. Et pour ça, il nous faut trouver plus d'argent pour les bourses pour les étudiants africains. 33% d'Européens, 26% d'Asiatiques, donc avec une réallocation des Chinois plutôt vers l'Inde cette année. 9% d'Amérique latine et 11% d'Amérique du Nord. Un autre élément d'information, nous aurons une conférence de rentrée le 2 octobre à laquelle vous êtes évidemment tous conviés en ligne ou en présentiel. Et le thème de cette conférence de rentrée sera « Propaganda and Mass Manipulation in the Contemporary World ». Elle sera donnée, cette conférence, par le professeur David Collomb, qui est un historien de la propagande et de la manipulation de masse. Là aussi, évidemment, le sujet n'a pas été choisi totalement par hasard. On me demande souvent en ce moment quel est l'impact en fait de l'état du monde sur l'Institut et pour l'Institut. Alors je vous ai déjà donné quelques éléments d'impact. Il y a un impact finalement étonnamment, je ne vais pas dire positif parce que c'est vraiment pas le terme, mais qui crée vraiment une opportunité pour l'Institut. C'est tout à fait clair. Au-delà des chiffres, qui sont à la fois les chiffres donc, des étudiants, mais aussi la capacité que nous avons aujourd'hui à attirer des professeurs, peut-être de manière encore plus simple que les années passées, parce qu'évidemment, il y a en particulier sur un certain nombre de sujets, de moins en moins de postes qui sont ouverts dans les universités américaines. Donc, la compétition est finalement peut-être un petit peu plus en notre faveur aujourd'hui. Mais au-delà de ça, je crois le plus important, c'est ce qui vraiment est une conséquence très positive pour l'Institut, c'est la manière dont ce que nous faisons devient de manière encore plus évidente très pertinent. Nous travaillons à l'Institut et nous enseignons à l'Institut sur à peu près tous les enjeux, tous les grands enjeux du monde. Et nous travaillons sur ces enjeux de manière systémique, donc en travaillant finalement l'interconnexion entre toutes ces thématiques, que ce soit le changement climatique et la finitude des ressources naturelles, que ce soit la complexité finalement de la transformation des systèmes économiques avec les limites de ces systèmes économiques, et en particulier autour de tout ce qui est durabilité, finances durables, commerce durable, etc., etc. Nous travaillons bien sûr sur toutes les questions de justice, d'équité, d'inclusivité à tous les niveaux, que ce soit entre les pays, à l'intérieur des pays, etc., face à cette montée des inégalités qui finalement est sans doute le poison le plus corrosif de ces dernières années. Nous travaillons aussi beaucoup depuis les 5 dernières années sur tout ce qui est lié à la technologie et à sa double dimension, la dimension de d'opportunités, de possibilités qu'elle ouvre, mais aussi la dimension problématique, la dimension boomerang, en particulier sur notre démocratie, sur notre capacité à nous parler, hein, on l'a déjà mentionné tout à l'heure, etc. Travaillons bien sûr sur la démocratie et sur les attaques actuelles et sur les nouvelles montées d'illibéralisme sous différentes formes. Et nous travaillons bien sûr, bien évidemment, sur la paix et la guerre, sur l'humanitaire et sa nécessaire transformation. On va en parler évidemment tout à l'heure, et en même temps son rôle extrêmement important dans le monde d'aujourd'hui. Et puis, bien sûr, sur tout ce qui est collaboration internationale, multilatéralisme, nécessité de repenser le multilatéralisme, et en particulier le rôle de Genève dans ce multilatéralisme. Donc, toutes ces questions sont vraiment au cœur de ce que nous faisons tous les jours. Pour ceux d'entre vous qui suivez, vous voyez que les événements se suivent, sont très nombreux, couvrent l'ensemble de ces thématiques. Et ce que je dis souvent, c'est que ce n'est pas parce qu'un certain nombre de personnes aujourd'hui disent qu'il ne faut plus parler de ces choses-là, ou disent qu'il faut en tout cas essayer de faire comme si elles n'existaient pas, qu'elles n'existent pas. Et toutes ces problématiques sont là, elles restent là, et aujourd'hui, dans le silence assourdissant des universités américaines, il y a un rôle, une place pour des institutions comme la nôtre qui est encore plus important. Et d'ailleurs, ces universités américaines avec lesquelles nous travaillons, qui sont proches de nous, nous le disent. Nous disent, gardez le flambeau, portez-le haut. Nous avons besoin d'institutions comme l'Institut qui gardent cette capacité de parler de tout, et de parler de tout dans le respect, et dans le respect aussi, bien sûr, de notre identité, qui est une identité académique, une identité scientifique. Donc c'est bien sûr dans ce contexte-là que nous travaillons avec cette exigence de qualité et d'excellence académique et scientifique. Donc, évidemment, il faut qu'on continue à prendre à bras-le-corps les évolutions au jour le jour. Et les évolutions au jour le jour, elles nous amènent peut-être aujourd'hui à devoir beaucoup plus nous poser la question de la guerre, de revenir à cette problématique. On en a parlé hier avec Pierre dans son keynote. C'est quelque chose qui doit revenir. La guerre, la sécurité, les questions de conflit sont de nouveau très fortement sur le devant de la scène. Néanmoins, je crois que c'est aussi important que nous gardions un cap, qui est le cap de notre identité, de nos gènes d'origine, on va dire, qui est le cap de continuer à penser, à parler de paix, continuer à penser, à parler de collaboration internationale, continuer à penser, à parler de droit international, une société structurée par le droit et pas par la force. Je voudrais citer en fait un petit bout du discours qui avait été fait par William Rappart en 1927, le 16 septembre, le jour où l'Institut a été inauguré. The Institute will contribute to reducing mistrust and the influence of secular prejudice, and it will work towards making our world one, where more justice, more truth and more light will prevail. Donc, en fait, ce qui est assez fascinant pour moi, c'est que ce compas, cette direction qui avait été donnée en 1927, elle reste totalement pertinente aujourd'hui pour nous. Le monde a changé. Certains des enjeux de l'époque étaient similaires à ceux que nous vivons aujourd'hui. D'autres sont totalement différents. Mais néanmoins, cette affirmation d'un rôle particulier de l'Institut et garder ce cap de continuer à parler d'un monde en paix, d'un monde plus juste, d'un monde aujourd'hui plus durable, parce que les deux, la paix et la justice, n'iront pas avec cette durabilité. Ça reste vraiment au cœur de ce que nous faisons. Quelques éléments sur le futur. Maintenant, est-ce que nous... à la fois ce que nous avons fait cette année depuis que nous nous sommes vus la dernière fois et puis ce que nous engageons pour l'année à venir. Alors, nous avons passé pas mal de temps cette année, c'était assez prenant, je vous en avais parlé l'an dernier, sur le renouvellement des 2 conventions d'objectifs, qui sont des contrats que nous signons en fait avec nos 2 institutions publiques qui nous soutiennent, à la fois la Confédération et le canton de Genève. Donc c'est un travail assez lourd, puisqu'il faut évidemment d'abord évaluer la convention d'objectifs précédente, et puis il faut se mettre d'accord sur les objectifs des 4 années à venir, et puis aussi renégocier les subventions. Donc nous avons eu beaucoup travaillé pour faire en sorte que la subvention de la Confédération ne baisse pas, parce que c'était quand même plutôt la tendance générale. Donc nous avons réussi à obtenir que cette subvention de la Confédération ne baisse pas, et nous avons réussi à obtenir que la subvention du canton augmente à hauteur de la subvention de la Confédération. Donc nous avons eu un beau succès sur ce point-là, et je voudrais là remercier vraiment l'ensemble de mes collaborateurs, que ce soit au niveau académique, au niveau des professeurs, au niveau de toute l'équipe administrative, tous les services, parce que ça a été un effort collectif, et finalement c'est le résultat de ces 5 dernières années de travail dans lesquelles nous avons vraiment profondément transformé l'Institut à tous les niveaux. Et finalement, le travail que nous avons fait a été vu comme très positif. Et donc, je voudrais vraiment remercier tout le monde aujourd'hui. Dans les priorités qui sont devant nous, évidemment, préparer le centenaire, c'est un peu la clé des 2 ans qui viennent. 2 ans, ça va passer vraiment très très vite. Donc nous avons beaucoup de projets en cours, mais nous sommes aussi ouverts à des projets que vous pourriez avoir. Nous avons le projet des profils d'alumni, mais ça, vous les connaissez, et puis Karine vous en parlera tout à l'heure. Nous avons le projet d'un livre collectif qui sera fait par l'ensemble des professeurs de l'Institut sur à la fois l'inscription dans notre histoire, mais aussi la projection vers le futur, et en quoi cette inscription historique nous donne la force et la pertinence pour appréhender le futur. Donc ça, c'est un des gros projets qui génère beaucoup de mobilisation. Nous avons beaucoup de projets qui sont des projets plus au niveau de chaque département et de chaque centre de recherche pour mettre en exergue l'apport intellectuel de l'Institut sur les 100 dernières années, mais aussi la manière dont cet apport intellectuel va se projeter dans le futur. Et puis, nous avons des projets qui vont impliquer nos étudiants. Je ne peux pas rentrer dans le détail, parce qu'en plus, je vois qu'Hakim est là, donc moi, je n'ai plus besoin de meubler trop en attendant qu'il arrive. Mais je suis à disposition, évidemment, pour vous en dire plus sur ce projet et sur ces projets. Et donc, évidemment, si vous avez envie de vous mobiliser en tant qu'alumni, de manière peut-être plus forte, plus différente, on est à l'écoute de tout ce que vous pouvez avoir comme idée. Et on a besoin de vous, de toute façon. Hein. Plus généralement, les 2 ans qui viennent, dans les priorités, j'en ai déjà mentionné, c'est de pouvoir faire en sorte... c'est vraiment une priorité très, très, très centrale pour nous, de pouvoir faire en sorte de trouver plus d'argent pour des bourses pour les étudiants en général, mais avec vraiment l'objectif de réussir à garder la diversité de notre corps d'étudiants, parce que c'est clé, ça fait la richesse de ce que vous êtes aujourd'hui, vous les alumni. Et ce qu'on voit dans le monde d'aujourd'hui, avec un Francfort qui reste fort, qui le devient de plus en plus, avec des complexités économiques partout dans le monde et en particulier dans certains pays, on voit qu'il y a un certain nombre de pays dans lesquels venir à l'Institut, même si les écolages sont bien moindres qu'évidemment les écolages des universités américaines, c'est compliqué, c'est difficile. Et donc, vraiment la priorité en termes de levée de fonds pour les 2 années qui viennent, pour moi, c'est de maximiser l'argent qu'on peut trouver pour des bourses, pour certaines régions du monde en particulier. Donc là-dessus, on a besoin de vous, de vos idées, de vos réseaux, de votre argent, évidemment aussi, si c'est possible. Mais voilà, je m'arrête là et je passe maintenant la parole à Hakim qui va ouvrir cette table ronde. Merci Hakim.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. You know, when I was a student here, I used to live in the pavillons. And it's always the one who lives closest who comes last. So, no, but I still live very close. Well, but so apologies for this slight delay. Patricia, Pierre, please join me up here, and we will now. Well, a big applause for you. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for taking time this afternoon. On the one hand, perhaps to reflect on some of your own feats when you were a student here, but also to take the moment to reflect on the moment we live in humanitarianism. You are the director of the Swiss Development Corporation now. You are the vice president of the ICRC. Pierre, you also gave a very impressive speech yesterday, the commencement speech. And I think in your two respective positions, what I wanted to reflect on is, can you help us make sense of this moment that we're living and what it means really for the humanitarian and development nexus? Perhaps we start with you, Patricia.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation. It's a question I'm asked a lot, and I think one of the things that we see, I call it international cooperation in the age of the carnivores. While we went towards vegan, and we wake up in the age of the carnivores. And so this is a new thing. I think the tendency was already clear a couple of years ago, but the acceleration and the contagiousness of what is happening is surprising all of us. The other comparison I often do is with COVID. Everyone knew that pandemics were here, but when it was here, everyone was surprised at the speed and at the contagiousness. We managed to get out of it, so we will have to manage to find the antidote for the state of affairs that we are in right now.
So there is something about the speed and scale of change. There is something about power, I think, with respect to who can really use what instruments to achieve his or her specific interests. Now, specifically with the humanitarian operations that you maintain, how do you see this confluence of speed, scale, power, the carnivores, as you say? Who is eating the vegans in this sense?
So I just want to thank you also for the invitation, and just in the spirit of full transparency, Achim, since the Vice President of the ICRC also teaches at the Institute, I just want to make clear that I'm the Director General, just to not have any confusion or to run into trouble at a later stage. Look, I think what is very striking for us at the present moment is what I call a casualness when it comes to our attitudes towards war. And it seems that, and in a sense, what Marie Lorsal did earlier when she quoted William Rappard, it seems that we become wise collectively only after major catastrophes. So when you think of what we inherited after World War II, the UN Charter, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Geneva Conventions, the Refugee Conventions, the Genocide Convention, all of that happened and was negotiated in a very short period of time by people who displayed incredible creativity when it comes to drawing lessons from a major calamity. Will we be able to think and to prevent the next calamity? Or will we once again become wise only in the aftermath? Will we once again be licking our wounds and say, never again? How many times do we have to do it again in the name of never again? And this comes from the fact that we treat wars as something inevitable in human history, that it is simply an inescapable part of being human. And one can be forgiven for thinking that when one looks and reads our history books and others, but when you deal with something or treat something as inevitable, you fail to mobilize the necessary energies to prevent and resolve these calamities. And here, just very briefly on Patricia's point, we all remember that during COVID, we might have had very different attitudes towards what was the right thing to do. But in nobody's mind, the right thing to do would have been to do nothing. And in today's world, I have to say that we are very desperate to see more political courage displayed and more action, rather than hearing politicians again and again explain that this is not the right time, that we will not talk to the enemy. That is not an act of courage, and we need more courage today.
Thank you. And now, you mentioned, on the one hand, this moment where, in fact, we know that things can become much worse. That there is now the moment for courage, and also the moment for not just politicians, but I think also every, at least in this country, every voting individual to stand up. And that there, in fact, the problems are growing faster than the solutions to them. Now, let us look into now your operational experience, not just in your present positions, but also previously when you worked in the field, when you were out there very closest to the realities of wars and conflict or development challenges. How would you disaggregate the opportunities for individuals? Also, many of our young students who are going to get into the field, what can they do now? They can stand up, as you rightly say, but then if you are in the middle of, let's call it, be that Gaza, Sudan, or even if you are in Nepal now, what can you do? Very practically. Can you disaggregate some of the opportunities that is out there for professionals which are out there now? Why don't we start with you, Pierre, and then we come back to you.
So there are many different things to do. And I think the fundamental thing that, at least personally, I draw from people that were at the origin of the ICRC, now to speak about the origin of this organization, is that when, as you know, Henri Dunant arrived on the battlefield of Solferino in 1859, seeing 40,000 dead and injured on the battlefield, himself a businessman, therefore neither a humanitarian nor a doctor, but felt a deep shock and indignation at suddenly realizing that this is what wars are actually about. Wars are not about the acronyms of fighting forces or the front lines designed it. It's about the human consequences of war. And on that day, there were more members of the veterinary services than there were nurses and doctors to accompany the fighting forces. So of course he realized, and he felt indignation. That's, I think, what many of us feel today, and I'm sure many as students you feel indignation at the events today, indignation at the inaction in response to the horrors in Gaza, indignation at what is happening for decades in the Democratic Republic of Congo or in Sudan, indignation at what we have allowed to happen, whether it's in Ukraine, Afghanistan, or elsewhere. So the crucial act is to transform that indignation into action. Now that action can be advocacy, it can be a mobilization, it can be an artistic expression, it can be political action, it can be a humanitarian response. And I would say today that I think humanitarian work remains absolutely essential, and Marie-Laure Salle said earlier, it has to be transformed as well. We can come back to that theme. But I would want and I would hope that among the students that have just graduated from the Institute and among the students that are just joining the Institute, there would also be some who would invest their time and energy into strengthening the international system again when it comes to conflict prevention and resolution. We are exhausted by the number of conflicts that we are working in and that go on and on and on. We need more creative thinking, more decisive action, and a re-strengthening, a re-legitimization of mediation, negotiation, and the belief in dialogue.
And as a professor in mediation, I'd also say what this takes is money, because at the moment, the peace mediation community rests upon roughly about $300 million a year, which is relatively small in the NGO sector. You might have another 100 or 200 million if you add the investment of Switzerland, Norway, Qatar, and a few others. But in comparison to the amount of money, the money for war making, this is abysmal. So if we want to go into the revolution of conflict prevention, we need to not strengthen humanitarianism, but we need to invest in peace, which is a kind of a different brand of professional, which is somewhat more closer to my work, because there is a difference between peacemaking and humanitarianism. And the sanctity of the humanitarian world is important to stay, but at the moment, the peacemaking world is completely underfunded. And that's, I think, something which needs to be worked on. But I'm just the moderator, so this is a long moderating comment. And a long... No. Apologies for abusing my role, but it always triggers me when humanitarian professionals mention to do more prevention and peacemaking without understanding really how underfunded the sector is. Patricia, practical recommendations, or practical experiences from your own life, what one can do to confront this major moment. Help us to disaggregate the opportunities which are out there.
I think there are three. One is about personal attitude. What can you do personally and how do you feel about it? You mentioned courage, and I think everyone can do something in their own environment and around his or her closest place where you actually work or live. Then the second is around also asking the question, what did we do wrong? Because we are in the wrong place. So honesty. Not everything we did, not everything we thought we did for the right thing went well, so why not? And I think that is also lacking. We have to be very honest. We are still sometimes in a bubble and thinking we're doing the right thing, while others that we didn't listen to so well have told us for a couple of years already, hey, there is something wrong. So listen and be very honest in what we do and how we do it. That's the first part. Then the second is money. Of course, you mentioned it. I have to say it because we disperse some of it. But money, what have we lost is the US part of money. So the dependency on that is absolutely flagrant. Almost 50% of the humanitarian money is US money. How did we get there? And how did we not actually convince or manage to convince others to burden share before? So now we're here. And that, I think, is another problem. And people are dying because it was so sudden. So we will have to breach that gap immediately in some of the places, and everyone can contribute to it, as you mentioned. And then be quite honest about the transactional costs. Is this a good thing or is it a bad thing? Grants versus investment. In the sector I'm now more covering, the Saudis, for instance, they tell me we invest in development. So it's a shift of attitude of giving, the philanthropic attitude towards investing. And actually, it's not so wrong to invest in the humanitarian values and invest in development, but it has a shift of mindset and it comes a lot of funding with it. So this is around the money, where we can change and maybe adapt. Then the one about values is a bit more complicated, because what we have actually seen shifting is the values around the legal frameworks and impunity. And I don't know how many future judges we will have around this, in this room, but look at it, impunity is spreading everywhere with everything. And the other issues, we're going back on our legal frameworks, international humanitarian law. You're probably going to ask that question. I was in Ramallah a couple of months ago, and colleagues asked me, my daughter is wanted to study international humanitarian law, but she told me, why should I? Because no one is respecting it. So we are going backwards, so we will have to kind of get that right again. When we talk about the mine treaties, Ottawa, I was an Ottawa generation, the landmine ban. Today, countries say we are using landmines, and we even say, okay, why not Finland? Because you're a nice country, so why don't you use it? No, we should actually cry out and say, no, we've all agreed not to, so why are we moving back in the name of what exactly? So there is an awareness raising to be done, and the same goes with the Sustainable Development Goals that are actually in an emergency room currently. So we should also revive those and talk more about prevention and invest more in prevention than into war. And that is actually also in our different areas that we can do that. It was a bit long, sorry.
I think the mindset shift towards investment, I think that's very palpable and good. And also, let's recognize we've never known so much about the atrocities that happened in this conflict because of the coverage. So the information about the terrible things that have happened is there. And for future lawyers and future judges, as you say, perhaps those also that come out of our institution, I think there will be a job done for over the next 10, 20 years, because the information stays. Now, I'm sure you have also many, many questions. So we have some colleagues who are there with microphones. We have already one here. You have the abonnement of the first question every year. I know that. So we take two or three questions at the same time. We have the gentleman here. Why don't we start here, please, with do we have a microphone? Ah, there. Okay. Here you go. Please.
It's normal that we're lost. We are in the fourth, probably, major shift in human history.
You just introduce yourself.
Oh, Jean Frémont. We're lost because the disorder is a normal situation as we are in the fourth major turning point in history. Now, how to get out of it? The problem we're discussing is a Western problem. It's not the problem of a global South. It's a problem of a West which is witnessing a major power shift from the West imploding to the global South. And the response of the West is very much, let's prepare for war. And it's a war which the West will lose. If you have been observing the recent 12 days war, who has won that war? Iran. By just sending signals, not waging war, sending signals. When I witnessed, or when I saw that Iran has targeted the Weizmann Institute, I said, this is signaling the power of Iran. So the nature of the war has changed with the 12 days war. And this is a war which the West is not preparing to wage. So I think that the West should stop investing in a war it will lose, and invest in development. I think the Saudis are right. So it's not a question, it's more a statement, but I'm fascinated by the fact that we're lost in confusion, and we should get out of this confusion.
So not lost in translation, but lost in confusion. Very good. We have the gentleman here with the white polo, please. And then I've seen you, and yes, please.
And thank you so much for the panelists for your wonderful insight.
Just do introduce yourself briefly.
My apologies. My name is Henry. I'm a student at the Graduate Institute. The question is more from a microscopic perspective, because what we are seeing is not just the major organizations are suffering, the more smaller grassroots organizations are also lacking the resources in this carnivorous age, let's say. My question is, what can or should those grassroots organizations do to survive, to keep working, to keep fighting the good cause in this age of carnivorous age? Thank you.
Yes, and then we had a hand here. One final hand, this gentleman here. Exactly. And after that, I have one more final hand. Please.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sanket, and I just graduated yesterday. Yeah. Thank you very much. And Pierre, I heard your speech yesterday. It was very amazing. And thank you so much for this panel as well. So as someone who wants to work in the field, I want to ask a very human level question, like what goes through your mind when you take a very difficult field posting, and in moments when your work feels overwhelming, or when you just feel like you're a small part of a very larger machinery, how do you find the motivation to keep going and continue making a difference? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very good question. Thank you. Is there any final question? We had, yes, please.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for this amazing panel, and thank you for the organizers to arranging this. I'm Paola from Mexico. I'm just starting my LLM in international law on Monday. So I think I'm speaking a bit for those who are just coming here and who are arriving. What's the best advice you could give to us to not lose hope on these hard times that the world is facing and that the international community is facing, especially considering the area of international humanitarian law? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Anyone of you who wants to start? Pierre, why don't you get started?
Well, maybe I can connect that last question with the points that were on IHL, the changes, and a little bit also the Western perspective. So if I start with the comments that Jean Frémont had about the Western attitude, so I will, of course, not go into the questions that are specific to Israel and Iran, but I will look at what is happening today in the world in terms of violations of international humanitarian law. And of course, what is happening today is horrific. We're seeing grievous violations of international humanitarian law. And even if you leave the language of IHL aside, what is happening in human terms is unforgivable, that we are allowing this to happen collectively. It is unforgivable, because nobody will be allowed to say in the future that they were not aware of what's happening in Gaza. And I remember during the Bosnian War, that's 30 years ago, already at the time we said, there's so much information about this conflict. CNN every day, it was being reported about. But remember that the lesson you draw from that is that there is no correlation between big amounts of information and resolute political action, which is, by the way, something that always intrigues me when people say you need to speak more about. Today, when I'm asked the ICRC's position on something related to Gaza, I really have to say, who needs another ICRC report on what's happening? Is there anything that we do not know about civilians killed in catastrophic numbers, forced displacement, starvation, ethnic transfers? Everything is happening in there. And you can add to Sudan and go to other conflicts, and you will have similarly this feeling of outrage. And so what is happening there is that we forget too easily why we have these rules of international humanitarian law. And then we become cynical and skeptical about them, when in fact it was a legacy. And when we hear, and I heard it already after 9/11, this was one of the quotes in academic circles, but also in political circles. People said, well, the negotiators in 1949 who had discussed the Geneva Conventions had not anticipated a world with Al-Qaeda in it. That was a quote from the post-9/11 debates. That's a literal quote. So imagine how self-centered one has to be to say that the negotiators in 1949, who had survived everything from the Holocaust to Hiroshima, from Coventry to Dresden, needed the complexity of Al-Qaeda in order to be relevant. Yeah. So they knew exactly that in every human being, there exists, in each of us, speaking about the honesty, in each of us exists the limitless capacity to inflict the worst possible suffering on other human beings if left to our own devices. And I always ask myself, if these conflicts that I witnessed were happening in my country, who would I have been? It's easy to look at another context and say, oh, well, of course, that's how they settled their disputes. But if this conflict were happening in my country, who would I be? The critical journalist denouncing the IHL violations? The human rights defender who would be always on the front line of saying the right things? No. And as a man, the most likely outcome would be I would be in one of the fighting forces. And once I had carried out my first massacre, I would have crossed every single moral front line, and I would be a different person. So the reason why we defend international humanitarian law is precisely because we know that it is possible that we cross the red lines, and that we have to stand there firm in defending this and to thinking the next generation. So in order not to lose the hope, which was your question, it is exactly to transform this deep feeling of uncertainty, the anxiety that we feel, and that every generation feels at a certain moment. And the great responsibility that you take up through the studies and everything to translate your indignation into something that gives meaning. And I have to say, this is one of the big, really huge privilege to work in the ICRC, is that there is a formidable sense of purpose. We make mistakes like everybody else. Each delegate who has worked in the ICRC, and I see Maria Soledad, who currently oversees all our operations in relation to Gaza, so any question you have, she's here. Everybody can... So, you just thought you were going to have a relaxed afternoon. And you know, to transform and to give this sense of purpose to one another. So we make our own mistakes, we have to rethink, but there is really something. And when you said, what is it? The question was, how does one prepare oneself for the time where one arrives in the first context, and the feeling of being probably overwhelmed, powerless. The absolute certainty is that there were certain things you will do wrong. And please feel that that is okay, because nothing prepares one for facing the consequences of war the first time. Now, many of you probably come from countries that experience war or organized violence. That might be different. But as a human being, nothing prepares you the first time. But also see the incredible value. And I'll just quote a Colombian woman who we interviewed as part of the development of the institutional strategy of the ICRC. And she said, I asked her, what had been your first experience of the ICRC? She said, well, I approached it the first time when my son went missing. That's 18 years ago. We still have no news. I have no idea what has happened to him. But you, ICRC, there isn't a single day where your colleagues were not with us. There isn't a single day where we could not turn to you for some form of support. You couldn't resolve the disappearance. You have not found the trace yet, but you were always there. And if I think of the number of colleagues over 18 years that will have accompanied that single family, that is worth every effort, every doubt you might have, and every moment of being overwhelmed.
And of course, as much as ICRC and humanitarians feel that, those who work on the grassroots level, they feel that too. So Patricia, you work a lot, of course, with the grassroots actors also, who work in terrible circumstances. How do you respond to these questions? How to find opportunity in this context to work at the grassroots level?
Maybe just because I worked at the grassroots level when I was your age, and I hear your question, and you're always with a doubt and with fear, and your heart is pumping and you don't know if you're doing the right thing. I think what we can trust as human beings is our first instincts. They're usually right. And if you don't let too much of the instinct go into your head and back and forth, you're probably doing the right thing. And then humanity. You can also sit down, hold the hand of someone, or drink a cup of tea. That's fine. So let time be your ally. Sometimes. I remember, Pierre, you said something that I still have in my mind. De temps en temps, c'est urgent de ne rien faire. Sometimes it's urgent to do nothing. Just to sit and listen and maybe reflect a bit and then do. I think in the time that we have today, we tend to be speedy and try to have immediately a response. So let time for time. That can also be a good advice. For grassroots levels, actually, you are the ones that bring to your own government and to the international community the reality that people live, because you're the first to respond. No one else can be as fast. We see that when natural disasters hit. And you're also the one that bring the reality. You may not be able to fill in all the forms that donors bring to you in a speedy time, but you are the translation of the reality of your people. And I have a tendency to say the concept of West and not West, I don't like it. Because in this room, we are all Western in that sense, because we have had, or we are about to have, an excellent education, So someone paid for that. We can read and write more than one language, and we are connected globally. But many millions, billions are not connected and don't have that privilege. So that is the non-West. So it's not about countries, it's about communities. You are on the grid or you're not. And if you're off, you're totally off. So our joint responsibility is to bring more people on the grid. So grassroots organizations can do that best, and you have to force us, donors, and your own government sitting in the capital to look into these problems. I think that is the advice I strongly give to you. So thank you.
Achim, can I just build on one point? I just want to connect to a point that Patricia mentioned earlier when she spoke about the Ottawa Convention, because it is important, and here there will be a short link to the Western world, despite the discomfort of the labels. I think it's just important to remember that at a moment when the ultimate test of how serious a country, a government, or an individual is about something related to international law is the test that is applied to oneself. And the Western world is known to have been both an active promoter, but also at times an active lecturer towards others when it comes to the importance of ratifying conventions, applying conventions, and the amount of time dedicated to telling the other that he or she is not upholding the standards strongly enough. Yeah? We've all seen that happen. And now, the Ottawa Convention is the ultimate test and a reminder once again, as we witnessed after 9/11, that when one's own national security is at risk, suddenly the reflex is to opt out. So the countries that are now withdrawing from the Ottawa Convention, what are they signaling actually? They're signaling that they entered these conventions when the sun was shining, but that as soon as the storm is on the horizon, there's a luxury to withdraw from it. But count on the West to continue to tell others that they have to apply and abide by these very rules. And this doesn't work. So now is a moment of honesty, because everything is laid bare. The reality of attitudes is going to be very visible. And this is also a formidable moment to think differently. So I just want to very briefly illustrate something that the ICRC did, and there are many other examples, but I just want to, we launched last year a global IHL initiative, and we decided to do it with 6 countries that would signal something slightly different in the multilateral setting. So our president in New York launched this initiative with Brazil, with China, with South Africa, Kazakhstan, Jordan, and France. And this was a signal that we believe, first of all, that these rules belong to everyone, to every continent, to every culture, to every community. They have not originated from one part of the world. They were codified at a certain moment. But in every society, you find the same practice and rules to protect prisoners in times of war, to try and preserve civilians, women, children, whatever the definitions are that you come up with. And so now is a moment to recreate a new thinking, something that is more truly reflecting the diversity of the world we live in and the diversity of perspectives. And here, humanitarian action, including the ICRC, has much to learn still and to work on and to improve in how we do this. So it is actually also a moment where we can, if we seize the right opportunities, we can also branch out differently.
Thank you, thank you. And now let us come into the room. Let's change a little bit the very important things which you say and become a bit more personal, because you were students here. Yesterday you said a long time ago. We won't ask you how long it was.
It's displayed.
It's displayed. But you see, it's down below. So you have done incredible careers. You are Director General at the ICRC, Director General at the SDC. You've done many things in your life. Is there one thing that you remember you took from your studies here at the Institute that kind of accompanied you all these years? Can perhaps some of your friends or something that you remember? Patricia.
Yesterday I said, I revealed the secret, that since primary school, when I came to this institute, it was the first time I never missed one class. So because the teachers were inspiring, I really wanted to hear what they had to say. And also my fellow students were inspiring. I really wanted to hear their comments and then their reaction to the question I may have had. And it was for me a very tough moment because I was a young mother, or a mother of a young baby. And so this was for me the proof that actually when it's inspiring, you learn much more than just, it's a symbiosis between teachers and students. So that is maybe what I would like to share.
Thank you so much. A great message for the new students also. Huh? Yeah.
So since the date is on the screen behind me, there's no denying. So actually it was, and I think since one of my fellow classmates, Marc Joly, is here, we'll check if my memory is correct. I think it was in this very room that as the Berlin Wall was starting to fall in 1989, we were right here in this room, and we're probably studying for the 6th time since we had started our studies the Cuban Missile Crisis, which we were all passionate about, or maybe the prisoner's dilemma or something. And we felt that maybe on that particular class we could make an exception and actually debate the events that were taking place live around us. And I never forget, so this is why I'm going to be able to quote it, what the teacher, the professor who was teaching that class told us on that day. He said, and our question was, could we apply some of the theoretical foundations of what you're teaching us to the events that you're seeing unfold? And his answer was, we are here to make analysts of you, not journalists.
No.
So we were, so we retreated from that dangerous front line and settled for the next chapter of the Cuban Missile Crisis. But I think what it means was I have a memory of, now in hindsight, of the great privilege of being able to go back and forth between these momentous events, of which we are now witnessing many again. And so as you start your respective studies, live the intensity of what's happening around, see the connections, understand that it's fantastic to combine it with the analytical discipline, depth, the multiplicity of perspectives you will be looking at. And then, also in a friendly way, bring your indignation into the room, challenge the foundations so that this becomes a really meaningful conversation. I'll add just one anecdote of a class that I enjoyed particularly because I had a paper to give. It was a history class, and because it combined my double passion about cinema and international politics. Professor Yves Collard was the one who was teaching that, and the paper I wrote was on cinema as a tool of propaganda, since we were talking about that, in World War I. So imagine we're all here with our mobile phones and everything. At the time, the cameras that the actors brought to the front lines, they all weighed about 30 kilos. And so you can imagine how that was very different. But it was fantastic to be able to study and to dedicate one's attention to these kind of topics and then carry all of that into our first professional experiences. And so we're all indebted in that sense to the Institute, and it's fantastic to be here today for that.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And I can attest to you that the students today have the same questions and want to have the debate. And I, at least in my class, I open up. And in the state that journalism is today, we also need journalists. So thank you so much. I think, Karine, you would like to make an announcement or tell me that I went terribly over time with my moderation.
No, I mean, there are so many questions at Barton's and online. I don't know what we do now, if we answer some more questions or...
We can stop the clock. as we do in diplomacy sometimes. If you give it 15 minutes more, if you...
What do you think? I mean,
Yes?
the public votes. Okay.
Okay. So we stop the clock and perhaps we take some of the reflections from those who are in Barton.
Sure, thank you very much. So we've received a question from Sol Santos, an alumni, who's asking if you have any projection on how things will continue in Geneva and the humanitarian development, human rights situation, looking as like being a humanitarian worker who lost her job. She's wondering a lot about the future of our field and how it's like how to keep hope in this context.
Can you have one more, perhaps?
We also received a question from Antonio Salate, who spoke about the conflict of the concept about conflicts, and she was wondering what would non-violent conflict look like, and what would it take to invest in human-centered understandings of navigating conflict. Where is the place of human in not just in the rescue mission, but also in inventing a cure, actually.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And should we add one more question from the floor here? We have one question right here. The gentleman with the blue shirt.
Thank you very much. Alonso Perez, I introduced myself earlier. I have a question in this polarized world, trying to understand the other 50%. Why their sarcasm? Why this agreement or laziness or inaction when all these things are happening in front of our eyes? I could have never imagined that so many people could be so inactive. And what is that we are missing? Because it seems that we are all preaching to the converted, and we are all converted already here. But we lack this sense of understanding of what is making us so weak to act. Is this lack of legitimacy? Is this that they put ourselves in a corner that they unveiled mismanagement and corruption in the NGO society, in civil society, and that our gloves are in the floor right now. So what can we do to regain legitimacy, to wake up people? I live in Spain right now. I'm appalled to see so many young generations in the younger generation that are supporting or the other side of the story, in spite of a lot of information.
Thank you so much. One final question, the gentleman right here. And then perhaps we take you one after the other, and then we wrap up the questions.
Yes, I have a very similar question. So Yoshi Nagamine, I graduated in 2000, and working 10 years with the ICRC, under his leadership of Pierre Crenville. Having worked for the ICRC, I was always impressed by not only what we've seen officially on the television, but also behind the scene, like a backdoor diplomacy, mobilizing countries. Nowadays, I'm sure that you also do, but who are the actual allies? Because to go a little bit far, you have to work together with other countries, and in the end, it's the countries which ratify and lead the codification of international law. So you just mentioned the willing of the coalition of the willing of 6 countries. So is there any country we can look up to and hold this moral standard? Thank you.
And if you can pass your microphone just to the gentleman from here.
Thank you very much, Jean-Daniel Roux. I would like to pick up on what you say regarding money for peacemaking and mediation.
Mm-hmm. So I do get a question.
And I think I used to be in charge of the budget for peace promotion of the Swiss Foreign Ministry. And very often I was criticized for subsidizing a peace industry. And of course my answer was always, I prefer to do that than to subsidize the war industry. Now, this being said, there is no return on investment in our capitalist world for investments in mediation and peace. When UBS increases its exposure with the Israeli military industry early 2024, expecting a return on investment for their shareholders by 875%, by the way, of course they will have, and they had a return. It was a good calculation from a market perspective. Same thing for a Swiss National Bank, which is also having investment with the military industry. Another public institution in Switzerland, by the way. So my question is how to make, not development, not just development, but peace work, mediation work, attractive for investors because there would be a return on the investment. A return that you can count, that you can, which is material.
Thank you so much. Now we have a lot. The role of Geneva Humanitarianism, about the question about the other 50%, who are our allies, the question about money and peacemaking, and of course the business model for peace. Patricia, why don't you get us started?
Okay, maybe I start with the last question, because we were thinking about that a lot. And one good news about that one is the business community, they hate risks. They hate war, maybe apart from the ones that actually produce weapons, but business needs stability. So you can get this discussion with the business community at least started. And that is worth a first investment. So the investment for peace is an investment in prosperity. And I think that one has some traction. In terms of the other 50%, I'm asking myself this question a lot. And I think it relates to what I said first. We didn't listen because it's not something that just popped up. It was there. It's like a germ, and now the earth was fertile for it to grow. And the question is, who watered it, and why is the earth fertile for it to grow? And we cannot just not enter into dialogue with the other 50% because it will not lead us anywhere. So I think one of the issues is to bring them in the room in one way or another and to engage these difficult discussions, because it's of course easier to discuss things with like-minded or with people that are already preaching to the choir. This is much easier. That hard discussion is for the ones that it doesn't share your opinion, and I really, really, really encourage you to do that. Also among the students, maybe of other faculties, not everyone has the same opinion, that's okay. As long as we have some same values, and I think there is the center around the values, because we managed as international community to have these values. I take again the SDGs. 10 years ago, the world actually was creating that narrative about the 17 development goals, and a lot of partner countries that the Swiss government has actually puts it in the center of what they do and what they do. No matter how the government ticks or how the people tick, they had some kind of this in common, and we have to bring back to the slowest common denominator, and it's humanity, because we are all human. Everyone has a father, a mother, that at least, and everyone has some sort of humanity and wants to be recognized for it, and I think that we have to start from there. And the International Geneva, I think there we saw a first rally around common values and what we don't want to lose. From the Swiss Confederation, a package was launched to help, and also the canton of Geneva helped, and then the foundations came in. Foundations is an interesting group also, because rather shy in this world that has changed. Foundations, not all, but some made a big step and actually stepped in and came up and helped. And I think also that is an encouraging move that we see in Geneva a lot, but also elsewhere in Switzerland. And Switzerland has about 30 billion of capital in foundations. So if it's put to work into the value aspects, then we can move definitely forward there too.
So those were very interesting questions, really, and so I'll touch on a couple of aspects. I'll start with the question on who are the allies or who support the work, if I understood that well, Yoshi. And it allows me to create a connection with something that Achim said earlier, when the feeling was, I think, that I was making a comment about humanitarian and then underestimating the limited funds for the mediation and peacekeeping or peacemaking or and studies and others. The point currently, we have at least 4 clear examples that are happening right now where the work that the ICRC is carrying out on conflict in contexts like Ukraine and Russia, Israel and Gaza, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. There's also other examples from Yemen, but let me focus on these three, where our humanitarian work and the neutral intermediary role that we play is a facilitator and allows confidence building to take place in times where parties look for a negotiated path. Because of course the whole thing about conflict is that dialogue breaks down. And the role that we play, for example, in the Russian Federation and in Ukraine, in being the facilitator of the returns of mortal remains when the two sides exchange the dead bodies of their fallen soldiers and officers, is part of keeping channels of dialogue open between the parties. It's a humble and modest contribution, and we don't know when that can serve. In the case of Israel and Gaza, we saw it during the two ceasefire moments. So Qatar, Egypt, United States, and others were negotiating, and ceasefires happened, release of hostages, release of Palestinian prisoners simultaneously. So here again, the complementarity between the political actor and the humanitarian actor is important. And in the Democratic Republic of Congo recently, there was 1,300 members of the Congolese armed and security forces that were surrounded by the M23 in the MONUSCO camp that they had fled to. And while Qatar and others were negotiating, the ICRC was the facilitator of the transfer of these 1,300 people and their families back to governmental held territory. And so what I think here, what we have here is an illustration that although the humanitarian work is often seen as being primarily the convoys that go off with aid, whether it's food aid, medical assistance, water provisions, there's all this work behind the scenes in visiting prisoners, in facilitating transfers, in searching for missing persons that can be very important at the time where a dialogue starts between the parties, because they can be effectively used as confidence building measures. Now, here I create one short link to Geneva, which I think it's very important that we don't fall asleep here in Geneva. Because right now, a few weeks ago, I was invited to an event at one of the villas not far from here, Villa du Reposoir, where we were invited, something related to the Red Cross Museum, and we were introduced to the place, and one of the ladies living there said, well, 40 years ago here, Mr. Reagan and Mr. Gorbachev were hosted as part of their dialogue in 1985. Time that, as you can see, the date, I could remember. So, and I could remember that I was proud as someone born in Geneva, studying in Geneva, that this was happening in our city. But now we're taking that history for granted. We are seeing other actors far more dynamic maybe and creative in some of these fields. And that shouldn't be dismissed lightly. We see whether this is in Gulf countries and others in the world engaging and believing that mediation is. Now, whatever our opinions are of the motives, we should think in a networked way. There is space for everyone in the realm of conflict prevention and conflict resolution. And there are things to create as opportunities by joining up, I think, that are very important. And since the question was of the person who asked about the concerns regarding the future of humanitarian work, it is an unsettling time right now because a lot of colleagues have lost their jobs in relation to cuts in the US, but also in other aid budgets in Europe, where European countries are making the choice to redirect funds from humanitarian and development to national defense and security. So we are seeing there's a compounding effect there. And I think it's very important to stay hopeful and to believe, therefore, in transforming also what Geneva is in this identity that we are so proud of that is related to peace. Very important for the future, but that requires new ideas. And two more points I want to make briefly. One is on the question of the other. So whatever the other is, and I remember the title of a book written by an Israeli, I think either psychologist or who had himself served in the 1982 wars in Lebanon. And the title of his book, I'm translating from German because for some reason I have that book in German at home, is The Other in Us. And so as much as I also, and like anyone in this room, have strong beliefs in things of what I think are right or wrong, I also, certainly in the humanitarian field, have always drawn attention to the risk of judging the other. And this happened to me a day that I was sitting on the opposite side of a table in a Bosnian prison and had in front of me the prison director, and we knew that in that place of detention people were being tortured and we were trying to have access to them. And of course it went through my mind, how does a person become the director of a prison in which people are being tortured? And that is the day that I asked myself, who would I have been if this conflict was in my country? And therefore the temptation, in particular as a humanitarian, to take the moral high ground and to say, I could never be, how is it possible that? I can't imagine why you're thinking this or doing that, is a self-defeating path when you are in a humanitarian or in a mediation, I think, engagement. Because judging the other, by judging the other, from the moment you judge the other, you miss the encounter. And you fail in the modest chance of even influencing, and of course being influenced also, that goes both ways, in the conversation. So I really draw attention to that. I think it's very important. And the last comment, because I can't, because Antonia already mentioned this yesterday in her comments, that the path of nonviolence is an essential reflection to continue. Whether nonviolent analysis or modes of protest or pacifist thinking is very, very quickly dismissed as irrelevant, naive, and others, when in fact it is the fundamental antidote to what is deeply ingrained in the human capacity to inflict violence on others. So it is strange that while we're able in the medical field to think of the antidotes, when it comes to human nature, we often dismiss the things that would be most important to nurture. And I really think this is something that deserves far more attention, far more investment, and certainly I often think about it myself.
Thank you very much. And I think where you both are completely right is to emphasize the kind of uniqueness that we have in front of us here in Geneva. Not just on the connectedness, as you mentioned, Patricia, but also with respect to the instruments that grow from Geneva. And here I think from someone who works on peace and peace mediation and peace building in this town, I think there is so much inspiration plus capability here that is globally connected, that is not necessarily always as present in the imagination of this town as the humanitarian space. And I think there I can just emphasize that you mentioned there is so much unforgivable acts which are happening today. Well, there is in fact a very strong community here and out there whose very definition is that they are working on management the space of the unforgivable. That's the definition of peace building that they work on. And I think there is a much bigger role we can play, particularly of those new students who are joining us here. What's the hope studying here in Geneva? That's the hope. Go deeper in connecting the constituencies. Don't just stay in the humanitarian field. Go connect to the peace, to the development, to the health side. On prevention, the health professionals have been light years ahead than the peace professionals. With respect to with pathogen identification. So there is something you can get here that you can't get nowhere else, I think, and where the testament of this room is that we kind of still stay connected, not just to Geneva, but also the Graduate Institute. And this is why, of course, also we want to honor those who've done exciting work, which brings us, I think, to the next step in this ceremony here. And we just went about 45 minutes over time, which is, I think, absolutely justifiable given the time that we live and the two fantastic alumni that we have in front of us. Thank you so much.
En effet, je crois que vous pouvez rester quelques minutes de plus. Vous allez recevoir un award dans quelques minutes. Effectivement, je vais vite vous présenter d'abord Carlos Lopez, qui est aussi dans le Hall of Inspiring Stories, qui a été dévoilé maintenant dans le Hall Barton, où nous allons tous nous retrouver. Il y a énormément de questions à Barton, donc je pense qu'à peine vous serez arrivés, Patricia et Pierre, vous allez être assaillis de questions de gens qui n'ont pas pu vous les poser. Donc voilà, les portraits sont là-bas. Et en fait, Carlos Lopez n'a pas pu se joindre à nous aujourd'hui. Il a occupé des postes clés au sein des Nations Unies, notamment celui de directeur politique du secrétaire général Kofi Annan, qui est également un alumnus. Et puis, M. Lopez a terminé sa carrière en tant que sous-secrétaire général et secrétaire exécutif de la Commission économique des Nations Unies pour l'Afrique. Il a été l'un des auteurs de l'agenda 2063 de l'Union africaine et a joué un rôle clé dans le lancement de la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine. Et il a souhaité nous envoyer un petit message.
I feel very honored to be part of the Hall of Fame of an institution that is so important in my life and has contributed so much for what I have become, but more importantly to instill the values that have guided my interventions throughout my professional career, including the fact that from the very beginning international relations became part somehow of my upbringing, and I have benefited immensely from the ambiance that the Institute has created for us to be able to understand first the United Nations, the multilateral system, and then eventually that has guided me to have a career that has spanned in 3 continents and has contributed immensely for my understanding of the turbulences that we are living today. So I would have liked to be with you, but given the roles that I'm playing right now in the G20, COP30, it has become extremely difficult for me to manage my calendar this year, and that's why I am missing this unique occasion where I could have met many of you to thank all colleagues and all the various personal connections that I've established throughout my life, that a lot of them bring me back to my years at the Institute.
Pour remettre maintenant le Lifetime Professional Achievement Award à Madame Patricia Dancy, j'appelle Madame Jasmine Deinzayson.
Merci beaucoup. Merci. Merci à Patricia pour tout votre engagement. Vous êtes la first female Director General of the STC, donc on est très fiers de ça. Vous avez passé 25 ans aussi au ICRC dans les opérations que vous avez menées partout dans le monde un peu, et aussi votre héritage que vous amenez, votre héritage suisse et nigérien, et aussi la capacité de parler 7 langues. Je suis impressionnée. Vous a aussi permis de connecter avec les gens que vous servez. Donc merci beaucoup pour votre enthousiasme, votre engagement, et on est très fiers de vous avoir en tant qu'alumna. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup. Hier, à la cérémonie, je viens de dire que j'ai jamais reçu un prix de l'Institut, donc ça a tout de suite changé. Hier, c'était encore vrai, mais merci beaucoup. Ça me touche énormément. Ça me motive aussi, parce que normalement, ceux qui reçoivent de Lifetime Achievement, c'est plutôt very much at the end. Donc, j'espère de ne pas encore l'être, et puis j'ai encore l'énergie pour continuer dans le travail qui a besoin d'énergie et qui a besoin aussi de motivation et d'engagement. Donc, merci beaucoup.
Nous sommes d'ailleurs particulièrement fiers de nos trophées qui sont faits de plastique recyclé du Léman, de bois suisse et qui sont faits par la Fondation Ebenezer qui s'occupe de polyhandicapés. Donc c'est leur manière de pouvoir se réintroduire socialement et je trouve ça magnifique. Pour remettre le même Lifetime Professional Achievement Award à Monsieur Pierre Kruenbuhl, j'appelle le nouveau président de l'association Tingfang.
Thank you, Karine. I actually heard from Karine yesterday. Pierre gave a very inspiring speech to the graduating team. And I was feeling very sad. I was not there, but I think today I didn't miss anything. This introduction of Pierre is a bit difficult because he's not only my former boss, but my current big boss. I think, Pierre, there's no need for introduction. When I just joined ICRC 2017, I heard from a colleague. We used to have a great, charming, charismatic head of operations that he was very much appearing in a movie produced by MSF when you were in Afghanistan. But I said, okay, I joined ICRC in the wrong time because I would not be able to work with Pierre, but here it comes. So Pierre is so, your identity is so much connected to Geneva and to ICRC, and twice you are back, and in between you were chairing UNRWA, United Nations Relief and Work Agency for Palestinian Refugees. I think you being a very achieving alumnus, your story is really inspiring and it really gives hope in good time, but also in a challenging, tumultuous time like now. So I think, yeah, it's a really honor for me to be here, and congratulations.
Thank you so much, Karine, and thank you, Phang Ting, for your comments. I think what I would just add to this is, since I was also born in this city, and that the ICRC was born in this city, the Graduate Institute was born in this city, there are many reasons to feel strongly connected to all of you who are here. But I also want to say that like each and every one of us, we are born somewhere, but when we describe the history of who we are, we rarely summarize it and reduce it only to the point of departure. Our identities are also made up of the many roads that we traveled, the many places where we sat down at tables to talk to others or where there were no tables. And in fact, the history of the ICRC is very much that. So when we speak about Geneva, it is because it is the place that enabled this organization to travel around the world, and it's in a sense what happened to me also personally. But if you see who is in the room and some of the colleagues of the ICRC that are present, Phang Ting is a Chinese national, and Maria Soledad is a Colombian colleague, and others, we are very proud that today the ICRC has become one that represents a diversity of colleagues from all around the world. Not to mention the many of our national colleagues who take great risk every single day in the mission that they carry out, and often pay a very heavy personal price for it. And so this is the pride of being today here and recognized in this way. And it's also very much something I would like to share with all the colleagues, actually, because this is the special honor of being here today with you. And thank you, Phang Ting, for having made it possible.
Voilà, je crois qu'il est maintenant temps de profiter de l'heure et demie qui nous reste pour aller réseauter, rencontrer des alumni. C'est la famille, donc c'est facile, c'est pas comme du réseautage dans une soirée mondaine. On est entre nous, donc n'hésitez pas, vous avez vu que tout le monde est très accessible. Et puis il y a également le chapitre de Genève qui vous attend dans la villa, donc profitez du temps qui est à votre disposition et merci encore infiniment à tout le monde.